Hello there, folks. Welcome to a Göbekli Tepe to Stonehenge podcast. As you probably know, I'm Michael Bott.
And I'm Rupert Soskin.
And today we're here to talk about why we make a big deal out of the past, which may sound a bit strange coming out of our mouths, but I hope as we bat the subject back and forth between us, you'll see where we're coming from.
Yeah.
Anyway, anybody new to the Göbekli Tepe to Stonehenge podcast, we're the Prehistory guys, and the reason this is called the Göbekli Tepe to Stonehenge podcast is because we have a thing going on called the Göbekli Tepe to Stonehenge project, of which you'll find many bits of our content devoted to that project of knitting together the story of the Neolithic all the way from Anatolia up to the Wiltshire Plains. So there'll be links down below to find out more about that project. I'm not going to talk much about it right now because we want to get to the topic of our little discussion. But any help with the Göbekli Tepe to Stonehenge project, which needs support to get completed, would be very much welcome. So, Rupert,
yes.
Why do we make such a fuss about the past? What are we like?
It's a lovely thing, though, isn't it? That the past is now, and it always has been. People talking about the ancestors, people talking about whatever happened in the past, even if they've made it up. We love to have these important stories about our past. And I don't think that's anything that will ever change, is it? I mean, even now, you look at the modern fascination for people following their DNA backwards. How much can they find out about their ancestors? We love going back into the past to find out what we can. It's something deeply embedded in our psyche.
Well, that's a good explanation for the reasons why we even look at all. So that's about the end of the discussion, really, don't you think? Explanation. We like a good story.
We do.
End of. Full stop. Wherever it may come from.
Yeah. I tell you something that I find a little bit frustrating with our passion for the past, if you like, is that we made it into a sacred cow. And so one of the things that you see all over the place is that we mustn't damage this, or we mustn't do anything to upset that. And some of the most ridiculous examples are, one of the things that happened this year, one of the most exciting things to come out this year was finding out that the altar stone at Stonehenge came from the Orcadian Basin. So we know it came up probably from the very north of Scotland, somewhere up there anyway. And the thing is that the only reason they found this out was because samples from the stone had been taken decades ago, because you're not allowed to do it now, because you're not allowed to damage anything. And my attitude is, it's a lump of rock. And if the information that we might get is significantly important, then chipping off a couple of grains to do a petrological test, that shouldn't be, you're not allowed to do that. I think it's preposterous. In the same way, I said on the back of that I think that we should actually do an analysis of the stone of Scone, because we don't know what the origin of that stone is. It goes far too far deep into our past to know where it originally came from. And wouldn't it be an amazing discovery if we found out that actually it came from the same sort of area as the altar stone at Stonehenge, and that we are still crowning our monarchs on it today? I think that would be a fantastic thing to find out. But would you be allowed to chip off so much as anything off the stone of Scone? No. And I just think it's silly. It's just the past is important, and the items that give us the information about our past are not so important that they should never even be scratched.
Right. Okay. I mean, you're stepping into it sort of straight away there.
Yeah.
I suppose. Well, I don't know. Is it? The powers that be and people that actually have to make the decisions whether or not they are allowed to do certain things. I mean, the guidance comes. I suppose it's because these things take place much more in the public eye than they ever used to before. So you do anything, it's going to be noticed, and there's the backlash and the political uproar, because such and such a sacred thing has been damaged. What an outrage to the people who have some sort of attachment, or the people for whom this stone has some kind of meaning inscribed in their fundamental raison d'etre. Yes, you're moving in very, very limited with very limited scope, because somebody will always say something.
Yes, but that you see, I think that's where you need good PR people on the case, don't you? Because if you just said it needs a clean, yes, we need to clean this. It's important that we clean this, and in the process of cleaning it, we shall take a few grains and analyse them. Nobody would have a problem with that.
You reckon? I think probably there were people would have a problem with the cleaning.
Oh dear. But do you know there are
so many talking points already.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Love to see the comments.
Yes, yeah. Isn't it funny though that I suppose one of the other aspects is that one of the inherent problems with archaeology is that we're always dealing with what's left, and we amplify the importance of what's left without considering really what might have gone or what might not have been found. So, we've always made the point about the big settlements. One of our biggest settlements is undoubtedly going to be beneath London. We know there's prehistory underneath London that goes back, well into before humans were around. Hippos and all sorts underneath Trafalgar Square. But the thing is that our archaeology essentially comes from out in the countryside, or when they're building a housing estate. It doesn't come from the depths of modern towns, which are clearly the oldest settlements that we have.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, while we're on the topic, I mean, you raised a few eyebrows because in our visit to Göbekli Tepe, you were caught on film actually touching one of the sculptures in stone at Göbekli Tepe. Yeah,
yeah, people did complain about that.
Yeah,
and I say, get a grip. And I know that some people are going to be upset at me saying that, but it would be very, very different. And I apologise to anybody who thinks that this is an arrogance, but it would be very different if you had tens of thousands of tourists every day who had access to walk past something and polish it smooth with their hands. That would be a very different kettle of fish from just me or the other archaeologists who've been down in the pit, touching it. Like just this ever so seldom does it happen, as if that's going to cause any damage. It's we need to be respectful of everything, but I don't think that we should turn that into an almost religious thing of thou shalt not touch.
But somebody's got to decide where the dividing line is. It is forbidden to touch the stones at Stonehenge.
I'll give you a counter to that, though.
Yeah.
And that's that if you go to Jerusalem and you go to all these historic sites where a lot of these things are polished smooth from the millions of people who go past these ancient stones or whatever it might be because of their faith. Now, I find it questionable, really, that we should say that if it's faith-based, it's fine, and if it's archaeologically based, it's not. It should be a consistent reasoning with a consistent reason, if that makes sense, in my view. Anyway, I think that it's the sacred cow thing again. That we can. It's so okay. For example, you go into a stately home and you're not allowed to use flash photography because flash photography, with the thousands of people who would be doing it every day, that flash photography would ultimately cause a damage to particularly textiles in these places, and that's the main reason. Now, that's very different from you go to somewhere like Maze Howe, for example, and they won't let you take photographs inside. Now, your photographs inside aren't going to damage that environment at all. And the cynic will say, well, is that just because they want you to buy their photographs instead of having your own? Possibly, I don't know. But again, it's it's the reasons that we apply to things. Where should these rules be placed in terms of how sacred is the past? That's a moot question.
Yeah. Well, it's a conversation really to have with people that are making these decisions and upholding these rules as to what is believed and what is not believed. For example, the Stonehenge thing is not about the stone itself so much as the lichen, protecting the rare lichens on the stone. One wrong touch in the wrong place could wipe it out. And that means something. It means nothing to some people, but everything to others.
Oh, okay.
Anyway,
but
it's an interest. Sorry, go on.
I got to say this though, because the thing about Stonehenge. Now, and this is with huge respect because we know people at Stonehenge, that we know that friends of ours, and we have the utmost respect for everybody working there. I do still say, though, that every now and again, we had on one occasion when we were there that we had a guard tell us that we were not permitted to even touch the stones. And then you look at when it's open to the druids and what have you for the solstice, when everybody's milling around all over the stones, and it's like, well, it's fine for one day of the year when thousands of people tip up. Yeah. It's completely inconsistent and whilst, as my
if they're going to have people there during the solstice, that's unpoliceable as far as that is concerned. When you've got one guard and a few people, under on a timed visit, as we have been on a couple of occasions, then you can police that. So
you can police it, but that's my point. That policing a bunch of people who are there because they do respect the environment, and then not policing it when you've got people who don't actually care about the nuances of all of that. It's
yes,
it's the wrong way.
But I'm just putting myself in the shoes of the people that actually have to.
I appreciate that.
Choose to do these things or not for the moment, just to play devil's advocate. It's interesting that the conversation has gone down this route. In terms of how we look at artifacts, how we look at buildings and remains in terms of their preciousness, etc. And I think again, it's a question of where you draw the line. Obviously, if something is rare, then that heightens its relative preciousness, for example, and how you treat something. If it's the only example of such and such, then you treat it with kid gloves. When they're 10 a penny, maybe not so much. But on the other hand, from an archaeologist's point of view, everything, if it's got its proper context and it's written up properly, is of equal value. Because things don't acquire value in archaeology for their rarity. They acquire value for their ability to convey information or to extrapolate information from the context that they're in. But as I was saying, it's interesting that the conversation went down this route, because I think bringing it back to the human thing and more of a conversation about how people regard people in the past, and bestow upon them a kind of heroic, or an elevated position simply because they existed in the past, or they were associated with Stonehenge, for example, or Göbekli Tepe. To name to start at the
name our bookends.
Top.
Yes,
to name our bookends. Yes. You see what I mean? And that, because when we look at the past through that lens, with a kind of assumed elevation of, that it's a lost golden age in some way, or they knew things we don't, or that we've lost our way somehow.
Yes.
It was that kind of differential about the way we look about view people in the past that I thought the conversation would go.
Yeah, well, but
towards the
it's
artifacts.
true. They're both important, aren't they? And something that I find eternally amusing, actually, is that when you look back through human history, we can see that, generally speaking, we are becoming. We seem to be becoming more civilized. So we no longer have bear baiting in the town square, and we no longer, apart from the fox hunting barbarians, we no longer go wolf hunting across the British countryside because we've killed them all. We no longer go bear hunting and any of the other things that we used to do. We don't have public executions. We, all these things that we no longer do because we regard them as being uncivilized. And
can I wind you up? Can I wind you up for a moment?
Yeah, go on.
Really? And we no longer chip pieces off the King's Stone at Rollright Stones.
That's true. It's absolutely true. But that's, again, I think it's important to make the distinction that we don't chip bits off to take home in our pockets as amulets, but if we're tipping something off for a scientific reason to get information, that's a completely different thing altogether. But no, I'm just saying that I think it's funny that that a lot of people have this. You say heroic. Absolutely, I agree with you. But also spiritual. People do like to believe that you go back into the deep past, and people were somehow inherently more spiritual than they are today. Whereas all the evidence that we have at our disposal says that actually, if you go back certainly a couple of thousand years, we were pretty horrendous at the things that we used to do for fun. And you only have to look at medieval torture implements, for goodness sake. We came up with the most twisted ways of causing people pain.
In the name of spiritualism, probably.
True too. That's true too. Yeah.
So it's the quality of the spiritualism, I think, that gets skewed. I've no problem with having people being spiritual in the past, but it's what they do with that that's kind of important.
Yeah.
And do you remember when we put out Standing with Stones, which was the first instance in which we put forward the idea that henges up and down the country were not so much about priests wandering about proclaiming to the masses, as they could have been about blood sports. They could have been, proto bull rings.
Yeah.
And there's, absolutely no reason to throw that out with the bathwater, unless you have it absolutely that no, they couldn't possibly, because they were being spiritual all the time. And there were people, the knee-jerk reaction was there simply because of this attitude, which is probably very unconscious, but nevertheless it's there.
Yeah, some people were very upset at that proposal, for which it has to be said there is still more evidence to support that than there is to support them being religious sites of any description. It is, and I think probably that says more about our need than reality, really. I think people generally, it's fair to say, probably the world over, are very conscious of the fact that what we do as a species and what we like to see as individuals are really very, very different, aren't they? You could go all over the world and ask people if they want war or peace, and the vast majority are going to say that they want peace, thank you very much. And yet there's wars going on all over the world all the time, and half of them we never hear about. It's just what we do. Which is extraordinary. So maybe that we like to imagine our ancestors to have been inherently spiritual because it makes us feel that there's something we could cling on to or get back to. Do you think?
I mean, it is complicated, to be fair, because William Stukeley has an awful lot to answer for as far as this is concerned.
It is true.
If he and his contemporaries, who tended to be reverend gentlemen as well, let's face it.
Yes.
Stukeley was rector of Stanford Church.
Stanford Drew, was he?
Stanford, he was, yeah.
Okay.
But nevertheless, and fair dues. It was a fair extrapolation for the time. But everything was down to the Druids, stone circles, Stonehenge, Avery, whatever you like. It was down to the Druids. So this image settled in the public mind of the stone circles being danced around, or looked over by white-robed people. And this cloud, this blanket of mysticism descended upon it and becomes fixed. And as soon as you challenge that, people don't like that kind of challenge because it's an assumption. It's just simply an assumption. There's no kind of knowledge whatsoever. But you have to ask, as we have done in the past, just how many processionary pathways did people need to walk up and down?
Yes.
We're talking about the ubiquity of the Neolithic curses there. Sorry to get a bit esoteric early on, but of course... But also there's the God of the gaps thing, where if you don't know what something is for, it's just easy to put the ritual label onto it. Now, to be fair, a lot of contemporary archaeologists are fully aware that that's what they do. They have jokes about it, indeed. And talking about jokes about it, do you remember talking to Alice Roberts about this?
Oh, she was funny, yeah.
Yeah. and her SSDs. Can you remember what SSSDs are?
SSSD. It was do you know? I don't even remember. It was a site of
of special.
Was it spiritual delusion or something like that?
Oh, that's it. No, site of special sacred delusion.
Yeah, that's the one. Sacred delusion. Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, it's just an aid memoir for the knee-jerk reactions and not knowing what a place is for.
Well, it's something that has always bothered me. Is so, for example, when caches of whether it's broken tools or broken swords, bronze or copper items, that they've been found buried in the ground. A whole group of stuff together, and in many instances, they've been regarded as kind of sacrificial. That these things have been buried. So if it's a broken sword, for example, it's been buried so that it cannot be used again in this life. It's only available to the afterlife. Broken axes as well, that sort of thing. As opposed to thinking that, no, this is the local blacksmith is going to be melting these down and making more tools. And he's buried them there because he doesn't want someone coming along and stealing them in the middle of the night, which undoubtedly must have happened an awful lot. It's the presumption that something broken found in the ground is ritual, as opposed to any practical reason for it being there. It's a curious go-to attitude, I think.
Now, here's the thing. It may seem, we're the prehistory guys, and it may look, this scene may seem oxymoronic that, we're sort of trying to downplay the past, try to make it ordinary, where, a large part of our time is spent celebrating the past. What's that about? Is that in opposition? What are we trying to do here?
I think that's absolutely right, though, because it's the ordinariness of it that makes it so relatable. And
yes,
I think that you and I, possibly more than other people in our field, anyway, we're always banging on about it's about the people. It's not about that stone standing there. It's about the people who put it there and why they put it there and what they did around it and, what can we find out about the way these people lived. That's what's so exciting, not the bling, and it's not the stuff that you dig out of the ground. It's what the stuff that you've dug out of the ground tells you. And it was all.
And I don't think we. Yeah, I'm what we do and archaeology, I suppose, in general, is not useful. It can't tell us anything about ourselves by looking into the past and saying, they had special reasons for doing this, which tends to happen, doesn't it? That was special to them. If we get a grip on, that they weren't special in the sense that we're not special. In the same way, it's only when we get down to that level of looking our ancestors level in the eye, metaphorically speaking, that we actually learn anything from prehistory.
Yes. Actually, do you know what? You raise a really interesting point there, and I don't know if you did it deliberately, but we're increasingly faced by our own mortality and faced by the fact that when it comes down to it, nothing actually matters because it's all so transient. And, there's been a thing traipsing around the internet for the last couple of months that somebody's saying, think that in 100 years' time, that all your treasured possessions and everything else they'll either have been destroyed or given away, or they'll belong to other people. Somebody else will be living in your house, and all these things, and basically focusing on the fact that when it comes down to it, none of us matter. We're here today and we're gone tomorrow, and maybe we have an almost subconscious desire to make an importance for the people in the past, because that makes us feel better about our own transient moment on the planet's surface. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah. Yes. If I did make that point, it was not deliberate. It was accidental. So all good. And the other thing is, in this same space, whether or not we talk about spiritual stuff, is going beyond the spiritual stuff. It is when we don't understand something, or there's a gap in the understanding, is a tendency to apply the most exotic reasoning or explanation for something, rather than the simplest or the most mundane. It's just something we've got to hold up the mirror to doing, and wanting to do. Because, let's face it, and we're going back to the beginning here, talking about what's it all for. It's for making stories and narratives and stuff like that. And, the more exotic the explanation we can put in place, the more rich our story becomes. It's avoiding that temptation. I'm sure you, I, and many others have been guilty of galloping down hills towards wonderful exotic explanations for things, when simplicity
or in fact the other way around.
Best.
And something that I try to reel myself back, because I know that you and I, possibly me more than you, do give the impression that we're utterly anti-ritual anything. And
glad you said that. Go on.
Yeah. And that's so not the case. I appreciate that we do give that impression sometimes. It's not that we're anti-ritual. We're quite convinced that ritual was a hugely important part of these people's lives. Yeah. It's the fact that every time you find something new and just put that badge on it, then you actually stop looking for any other rationale behind it. You just stop exploring. And that's why we are so anti the badge, not because we're anti-ritual per se. In fact, in many ways, I think that there are going to be plenty of sites and plenty of aspects of just everyday life where ritual and mundane were utterly connected, inextricably linked. Even if that is, to take a modern religious equivalent, say saying grace before you sit down for a meal. You make something utterly normal in the day, but you give it a religious or spiritual quality. And it's just that as soon as you say temple, for example, which is about the most extreme aspect archaeologically, as soon as you say temple, then you stop looking for all the other possibilities, like whether it was a farm or whether it was an arena or whether it whatever. There's so many other things that these places could have been. But as soon as you say temple, then everybody just ticks the box. Yeah, we're happy with that, and move on and never explore it again.
We're not saying that it can't be or that it shouldn't be or anything like that. It's just just wait a bit. Hold on. Wait a second. Think about that for a second. Yeah. Oh, it could be a temple. Yeah, absolutely. Do you know what? I've no doubt that Stonehenge was. No doubt at all. But, other places, no. It's not so fast, is what I say. Yeah. No, cool. Do you know, what was the other thing I was going to say? It's the contingency aspect of how we project our way of being onto the past as well.
Mm-hmm.
And the assumptions probably that we make about the way progress is made, even in the modern age. We sort of project a sort of a pioneering spirit onto, say, the early farmers, and or the way perhaps that new inventions we made. We confer a kind of special kind of genius on people in the past because they made such and such a bit of progress, and we forget that so much. I don't know exactly where I'm going with this. But so much progress in the moment in modern times is made because the driver is commercial.
Yeah.
Commerciality is a huge driver
or
for
military.
stuff, and or military, and confers, creates a huge space in which innovation can occur for whatever reason. The commercial space is an evolutionary space all of its own. But take away that, and that the evolutionary space that you have left is how well your life is being lived, whether you're surviving or not, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And you're up against the normal evolutionary factors that come along with living a biological life.
Mm.
And evolution is not a driving force in and of itself. Evolution only occurs in spaces. Evolutionary changes only occur when changes in environment happen that necessitate, the competitive aspects of biological or living persons come up. So innovations that happened in the past are as likely to have been contingent and accidental as they are now.
If not more so, yeah.
If not more
you
so,
think of
yeah.
all the instances where something was discovered because somebody was just trying to solve a problem. And if you're talking about a time before money, in fact, I don't think there's anything else in the whole of human history. I don't think there's been anything greater than money for clouding the clarity of human existence. See, now everything that we do now, you're talking about commercialism. So everything that we do now is based on how cost effective it is to do. And because we have been living with that for centuries now, that we have a perceived value on whether something is worth doing or not. And I'm struck by, when people look at, say, take an ancient Egyptian artifact, and in fact, the one springs to mind of a vase. It's actually it's almost like a teapot, but it's a vase that is cut from a single piece of stone. And people say that this is, it shows that they had a technology that we have no idea what technology they must have had to do this, and that's because we look at something and think, well, how could you do that? Because we want to do everything in 5 minutes flat. And they got, I wish I could remember their name. There's a bunch of guys. They have a Patreon page, and they take things. It's basically scientists doing stuff specifically to find out what they can. And they got an expert stone worker. I'm not going to call them a mason. I don't think they were a stone mason, but a sculptor, what have you. And they asked them to reproduce this pot. So they gave them, the same kind of stone that the Egyptian one was made of, and they just had to reproduce this pot, and it took them 10 months. They did it perfectly. It looks the same, the same thickness of wall and all the rest of it. It took them 10 months. Now, can you think of anything else today where somebody would say, I want to make that, and somebody says, all right, it's going to take 10 months, and on that basis it's going to cost you 100 grand, and you go, all right, never mind. It's we've completely lost the value of doing things just because, that's beautiful, I want it, and it doesn't, money has nothing to do with it. When you look at, Göbekli Tepe, you look at some of those high relief carvings. So the leopard coming down the pillar in room C, and how long that must have taken, because it's standing proud of the pillar, which means that all the stone around it had to be cut away. It's not cutting an image
the one
into
you
it.
touched. It's the one you touched.
It's the one I touched. It is the one I touched.
Well, I was pointing a camera at you.
Yes. Hey, well, you can't accuse us of being dishonest, can you? But it's an important carving from that point of view, because it must have taken so long to cut away all that surrounding rock to get down to that leopard climbing down a pillar. How long must that have taken? And clearly, money and how much you got paid.
Not an issue.
No, not an issue. There you go. And I do think that clouds... Sorry, I'm kind of coming back to losing my thread, but what I was saying was that we have an attitude now of what people may or may not have done in the past that is clouded by our view of what we would do today, what we'd be prepared to do today.
And we've got a skewed idea of how culture is driven anyway, how culture evolves. I mean, evolves, there's no accident using that. It's as likely, cultures particularly, a result of accidents rather than innovation.
Yeah, that's fair.
The surprising thing, I think, is it Isaac Asimov had a story said about innovations as likely to people of something happening in the laboratory and somebody going, oh, that's strange. Well, that's funny.
He said,
I wonder if I can make that happen again.
He said the greatest moments in human discovery were not when somebody screamed eureka. It was when somebody went, oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
And it's
forgive me for mentioning Alice Roberts again, but I did actually briefly look at the interview we did with her. Maybe I'll put the link to the interview with her up there. It is that she herself, coming from a scientific medical background herself, so she's perfectly at liberty to say this, but she says even in scientific papers they cover up the fact that the results they got were as much as a surprise to them as make it out, we intended this all along. In actual fact, it's probably covering up the fact that the result was a surprise.
Yes.
You didn't know this beforehand. You weren't trying to prove this. This is an accident that happened. Yeah.
It's funny though. I mean, you're saying that because evolution. I think that humanity experiences more punctuated evolution than the steady pace of evolution. And you think how many times a new invention has utterly changed the face of the globe, and take the smartphone has got to be one of those examples that literally the entire developed world, the face of it has changed completely since we've had the smartphone. And I mean, this particular period of human change, the last century. You know, the fact that it was just, approximately 60 years from the first powered flight to man landing on the moon. And the fact that our grandparents saw electricity, the telephone come in, the television come in, you know, all these things that completely changed human life.
Well, anything to do with microchips surely has got to do with the space program.
Yeah.
And the fact that
absolutely.
Kennedy said we're going to go to the moon. Now, whatever political reasonings were behind, I'm sure it wasn't, we're going to drive the economy through going to, maybe, I don't know.
No,
the reasonings behind it.
That was all that
We're
was,
going to beat the Russians is more, there you go.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's these kinds of things, you know, the human brain, I'm afraid, doesn't seem to change that much.
No.
So I suppose it's our thesis that when looking back into the past, look into yourself a bit, you know, look at your fellow human being, look at your fellow travellers and how they're actually behaving, what they're actually paying attention to and what's important to them. Being able to eat, perhaps, you know, and knowing where their next meal is coming from. People will pay anything for their security, or will do anything to be able to secure where they are. And I don't think it's any different in the past. Whether it's doing the same thing over and over and over and over again gives you security, or whether it's doing something radical and different that provides security because circumstances have changed, or if it's massacring the village next door will provide your security, you'll do that. And I'm afraid it's with that rather jaundiced view, I suppose that's the thing, because there are no words, because there's no letters coming back from prehistory to give us the narrative, because it's so raw. How we interpret there, you know, what the evidence is so raw. We can take it as a bit of a mirror, and that's, I think, how, you know, that's my
I agree.
attitude.
It's so true, and I also think, you know, one of the things that we really should be very open-eyed about is archaeology, like so many rarefied airs. Archaeology is very much the domain of the privileged. You're not going to find people struggling for existence spending much time exploring archaeology. And I do wonder, if you go back to a period, people who spend their time doing pretty much what they want to do, you know, doing like us, doing jobs that we love to do and all that. How different would life be if civilization hadn't got to a point where we only have to go to a shop and buy the food that we need? If we had to go out and, whether it was catch our own fish or hunt our own food or grow our own vegetables or whatever it was, how much time would we have for all these niceties, you know? And I do wonder, I don't want to say anything overly contentious here, but I do wonder when...
well, stop now.
True. But you know, when you have a faith that might demand that you take time out to worship God at regular intervals and all the rest of it, you know, that if you were outside grinding away trying to eke an existence from the land, then if you did want to spend that time worshipping God in the same way, your God in the same way, then it would have to be somehow connected with the work that you were doing in the land. You couldn't separate them out. Do you see what I mean? I think that there would have to be something in your daily working that was connected with your reverence. You look at some of the South American cultures, for example, where the Kogi Indians, and I'm sure the Inca as well, probably had a thing where you, if you're going to have a drink, you just pour a little bit onto the ground for Mother Earth before you have any yourself, that sort of thing. It's just a way of ritualizing your relationship with the gods.
Oh, holy! I mean, I didn't want to go off down another rabbit hole.
Quite
just
funny
as I
you said
thought we
holy
were
there.
about to wind up. But despite the pushback on the spiritual thing about everything, it's my assumption. Maybe it's an incorrect assumption. It's my assumption that for people without science. And with a deeper connection with the cosmos, that their night sky, for example, is not blinded out by street lights. They see the sky as it is, and they see the stars, bright, as this canopy over them. There's a much more holistic, that everything. It must be obvious that everything influences everything else, and you must do your best to be in harmony with this thing in order to continue your existence. There's always going to be that dialogue about, who am I in all this, and what can I do to change it? Of course, all that's going on. But what we see in the ground, etc., what we see in stones and the stuff that people put in the ground is not necessarily a reflection of that.
No.
That's the thing. It may, the question is, how much are those things integrated and bound up together? Not making the assertions that's what they did, so it must be. They did other things. They raised animals. They controlled animals. They hunted animals, and that leaves a mark.
Yeah.
Farming leaves a mark. So it's as much as, what's left behind is as likely to be to do with living lives rather than, rather than worshipping the heavens.
Yeah.
End of story kind of thing. So I think that's the end of the conversation, really.
We could go on all day, couldn't we, really?
We kind of, but I think that would be too much. Maybe there's more talking points, rabbit hole to go off down. I think there are. I think later times. But
a quick one to end on, though, which I think is.
Go on, then.
It reminds me of, and I wish I could remember her name, but there was a handwriting expert who was asked to have a look at the Dead Sea Scrolls. And she was given a few scrolls to look at, and her analysis was that they had been written by, and forgive me trying to remember the exact details, but it was either written by 3 people or written by 5 people who were working in shifts, and she said that one of them was left-handed, and one of them was particularly stressed. And so she was just getting all this from the handwriting analysis, and they asked her what was her takeaway, at the end of all of this research, and she said that the one thing that she could say was that in 2,000 years, people hadn't changed one jot. And I do think that's something that. That we can look at across the board, really, when we look at whether it's violence in prehistory or whatever, wearing jewelry. We did like to wear nice jewelry and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, people are people.
Anyway, that's a really nice thing to close on. I hope we've conveyed some of the depths of our thoughts. I hope there's some resonance there for you, and of course we'd love to hear what your thoughts on what was said are in the comments. If you've lasted this long, all hail to you,
Yes,
I have to say. Don't forget to hit the like and subscribe. Do look at joining our Patreon page and have a look at how you can contribute to the Göbekli Tepe to Stonehenge project if you can. As I say, links down below. That's it. Thanks again for watching and for lasting so long.
Yes.
See you again very soon.
Take
Bye
care,
for now.
folks. Bye.
Oh, very good. Okay.
Jolly good. That went quick.
Well, I hope it went quick for the people watching.